Hi, I want to keep talking about self-replicating media, what I mean when I say that and why I care. First of all, I like to also use the term organic media because I think of it as media which behaves like a living thing, and I think that the most fundamental property that makes something a living thing is self-replication. Organisms self-replicate. Bacteria self-replicate. Animals, plants, fungi, we all self-replicate. And I think of the prototype self-replicating thing as being a seed. Like, for instance, the seed of a tree. A seed of a tree makes a tree. But it's worth noting that it's never that simple. A seed of a tree doesn't just make a tree. A seed is a piece of information. You can think of it as media that transmits through the world and that can make trees, but it doesn't make trees in isolation. It's always part of the whole system, the ecosystem, the forest. So an acorn carries the information of a tree, but not without also all of the other seeds of the other plants that make a forest possible, and the animals and the fungi and the microorganisms, the flow of water and air through the system. And so I think it's important to note how the biology works before thinking about how human media works. And in that context, in the context of living media, of organic media that really self-replicates, the prototype that I think of the most is religious scripture, is that religious scriptures for any religion are generally a self-replicating piece of media, in the sense that just as an acorn goes along with a forest, that piece of media self-replicates itself if you assume an entire ecosystem of people who represent that religion, that religious faith. And so, for instance, Christian scripture, the Bible of the Christians, self-replicates itself via the entire universe of what used to be called Christendom, of the Christian world. And the Jewish faith self-replicates itself. It can be thought of as self-replicating the Torah by means of practitioners of the Jewish faith copying that piece of media. And so it's potentially horribly reductive to take the whole world of a religion and focus it down to just that scripture. But it's the same reduction that you take an entire forest and reduce it down to seed, acorn makes tree, is the same thing as, and then tree makes acorn is the same as saying scripture creates the world of that faith, which then creates copies of the scripture. But I think it's a useful prototype to think of because, unlike a lot of the other media that exists today, it is something that it has a number of properties that are different from some of the more commercially driven media that exist in today's world. That some of these faiths have been able to last thousands of years, and they're able to split into many instances, each one of which is able to self-replicate itself in a local capacity. Any given community of people in a certain faith can self-replicate the scripture of that faith and keep going without being necessarily connected to the other instances. And that's the prototype that I want to focus on in this discussion, because that's what I want to be able to replicate in the self-replicating media that will build up the kind of technologies that I'm interested in here. So I think of there being sort of two, the biological branch and the human branch of self-replicating media prototypes, those being on the human side, religious / cultural replication, and on the biological side, I think of seeds of trees, which make forests, which make more acorns, and so on and so on and so on. And so that's kind of the prototypes of what I think of as organic media, self-replicating media, but I'm going to use the term organic media as somewhat interchangeably.